Welcome, everybody, to Crystallizing Conversations. This is our 8th episode.
I think it's going to be our 8th, right?
Yeah, it's going to be our 8th.
I forget what order we're doing this in. Okay, so our 8th. Yay.
Our 8th episode. And thank you for all our listeners. We're so excited to be here. We're so excited with the feedback that we're getting. And today it's just Jillian and I. We don't have a guest speaker. We're the guests.
We're the guests.
And we're going to be interviewing each other.
Yes. And this is going to be an episode all about crystals. Generally, I think if it's the two of us, it's going to be like a very crystal heavy episode. And so in this one, we are exploring crystal gridding and manifestation through crystal gridding. And I'm really looking forward to it. This is probably one of the most commonly asked questions that I get from my clients. And so being able to talk about it and share it is very exciting for me, especially because Iris and I we come at it from very different viewpoints. And so I think it's really great because no matter how you make your crystal grid, you can learn a little something and also not feel so hemmed in because there's lots of different ways to do it.
Yeah,
so,
I'm excited to ask you some questions too, because before we started recording, I was going through all my old Instagram posts and finding all the crystal grids I've done. And it's been really fun to look back over the years. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, which I didn't realize you had already looked into, but I was doing some research too, just because I've always done it intuitively. And one of the first things to pop up was Sage Crystals, which is Jillian's business. On, I forget the title. I don't think I ended up writing it down.
Probably Crystal Gridding 101.
Yes, Crystal Gridding 101, which look it up, you guys. It has beautiful grids on it, but also gives some little basic outlines as well. So just had to let you know.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. I think that's one of our top ranking blog posts. So
I'm glad Perfect. Yes, it's actually showing up. But before we get started, because this is our 8th episode, I wanted to take a moment, or we both did, to kind of, first of all, say thank you to each of you guys that are listening. It's, I checked right before we came in on our statistics, and this will be our 8th episode, but right now we only have 7 out as of recording this morning, and we have over 850 downloads on the episodes we've released. That is, we've only been out for 8 weeks as of when this airs, and we have over 850 downloads. So I just want to say thanks to you guys for being here and supporting us. And obviously you're enjoying, which is awesome. And I also I took some time to screenshot a couple of our reviews, which Jillian isn't on Apple. So she hasn't seen the Apple podcast reviews yet. So I want to read a few of them. The first one is called Nourishment for Your Soul. Jillian and Iris bring so much warmth and love to this fun and engaging new crystal podcast. Excited to learn and grow alongside these two inspiring women and become a part of their community.
Aww.
How cute is that? I can't even pronounce their screen name. It's a bunch of letters. QWWRRRPT. Thank you so much for that review. Another one by Brittany Lee. Amazing, inspiring podcast. I'm so grateful I found this podcast. I love the different informative topics in each episode. I am an avid podcast listener, and I can't say enough great things about this podcast. Thank you for all your efforts in creating this for the world to listen to.
Oh my God, I'm going to cry. Damn it. I can't smudge this. My eyeliner is not waterproof. I didn't expect to tear up this morning. Okay.
So sweet. This next one is Inspiring Listen. This is a great new spiritual podcast that I am thoroughly enjoying. The hosts, Jillian and Iris, are both so knowledgeable in all things crystals and have a very fun and informative way of sharing what they know. Looking forward to more episodes. And then the last one, such beautiful souls and so much resonates and reminds me of my own journey. Loved. It's just so, Jillian and I have both put in a lot of love and time and effort and countless hours behind the scenes on these episodes. So to hear your guys' feedback and heartfelt, it's just so soul affirming. So thank you. And if you are enjoying the episode, first of all, make sure to subscribe so that you continue to receive and get notified when we have new ones. As well as if you could rate us, and if you can leave a review. We're going to try and read these just because they're uplifting to us, and hopefully you guys are enjoying hearing them too. But just thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of our new community and podcast. It's just very exciting for us.
Wow.
All right. Well, let's get in.
I feel like I'm like speechless. I'm like, wow, I feel so touched that other people actually appreciate, the work that we do. Both of us have been so inspired to do this, and that it's being received and is benefiting other people is really incredible to hear. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. All right. Well, first of all, we're going to be talking about crystal gridding, as we said.
Mm-hmm.
What is crystal gridding?
Oh my goodness.
Let's get into that. So I actually printed up, or you did actually. I printed up one, and then you actually ended up, so I was like, oh, so I'm going to let you answer that.
I mean, we can both answer it. There's no one right answer. I will say, so one of my favorite definitions, and it's by no means the only definition, but one of my favorite definitions is by the amazing Hibiscus Moon. And Hibiscus Moon had a crystal certification course that was like the first accredited crystal healer certification course. It was really one of the first ones that was globally acknowledged. It was very impactful. And I actually co-taught another like elective course with her. So she published one of the very first crystal gridding books, and it was self-published.
Oh, wow.
It's available on Amazon. If you search in Hibiscus Moon, it'll pop up. And her definition is a crystal grid is a geometric pattern of energetically aligned stones charged by intention, set in a sacred space for the purpose of manifesting a particular objective. And I love that. There's lots of little parts to it.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't always have to be all of those things for it to still be considered a crystal grid. But I think that's a pretty thorough definition, right? We have stones that you have intentionally chosen that are energy, that you've energetically charged with your intention, arranged in a geometric pattern in a sacred space for a purpose. Very clear.
Perfect.
I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's also, which I didn't even realize, because when I've been doing crystal grids over the years, I never really had any of that in the back of my head. It was just like this intuitive thing, right? But intuitively, it's always been in these patterns that almost like mirror each other. And as I'm scrolling through my crystal grids, they have been like these, laid out mirrored images. And so crystal gridding, I didn't realize, has to do with sacred geometry. And sacred geometry has been around since, the Big Bang. And thousands
since the Big Bang.
Well, since the Big Bang, but like even
but
Egyptians,
humans being able to utilize is even before then.
Yes, exactly. And it's like even from the tiniest microscopic atoms to the cosmos, sacred geometry is there. It is present.
So whether
that's what. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's what these crystal grids are based off of, is these patterns. And I just found that so amazing and so cool. And it's basically us tapping into essentially our ancestry as humans and who we are as humans. I mean, we're built up of sacred geometry. So crystal gridding is just a way of expressing our natural formations, essentially.
Exactly. So the way that I like to think of sacred geometry, and people ask me, what is it? Is it's a way of communicating to the universe in the language of the universe, because sacred geometry is the building blocks for everything. It's not just found in the architecture that we create. It's found in the way that leaves and buds unfurl from a branch. It's found in the structure of every single living thing. It's found in the spiral of galaxies. It's found in molecular structures, right? Even our own DNA genome is sacred geometry, right? We have that spiral, we have that that balancing the way that that you just said. So many people believe that sacred geometry provides the container for all of life, and that without sacred geometry, literally nothing can exist. And it's through the study of sacred geometry that we can actually gain an understanding of the universe around us, and through that, unlock the building blocks of creation itself. So when we're making crystal grids, we're really just tapping into that ability to co-create with the universe. Crystals themselves are made of perfect crystalline structures. So crystals are actually, when you look under a microscope, repeating patterns of sacred geometrical forms. It's hexagonal, right? Mm-hmm. There's all these different variations, but they're all repeating geometric patterns. That is literally a definition of a crystal. So crystals really lend themselves to sacred geometry. So when we make a crystal grid, we're just aligning the appropriate stones and geometric form with our intention to manifest. We're literally speaking to the universe in its own language. And I love that.
I love how you just worded that. We're literally speaking to the universe in its own language. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like we all speak, I mean, if you're listening, which is really exciting, we do have listeners outside of the US and Canada. We have listeners over in Sweden.
Wow.
And
hi, Swedish all the other countries, but yeah. Thank you for listening. Wow.
So if you think about it, language, we all have different languages, right? But the universe is still able to understand. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily about what we're actually saying. It's also in what we're visualizing and what we're putting out there. And so, yeah, sacred geometry and doing these crystal grids. Oh, I just love that. Because again, I've always done this without any intention. There have been a few where I'm like, ooh, I really want to do a grid for self-love, and I would make that out, or I really want a grounding grid because I need it. But a lot of times I was just doing it creatively, just by inspirational flow. So to realize that we're tying into our own nature, it's just mind blowing, and I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that leads us to, I don't know if they've actually been defined as two schools of thought, but for me with crystal gridding, it seems like there's kind of two basic ways of doing it, shall we say. So there's the one way, which is what I was just talking about, right? Like you have an intention, you're like, I'm going to communicate this to the universe through sacred geometry. I'm going to pick stones that align with my intention. I'm going to pick a geometric form that aligns with that intention. And I'm going to make this grid for the purpose of manifestation, or for the purpose of, and manifestation doesn't always mean physical. It could also be like inviting more love into your life or feeling a certain way. It doesn't always have to be like a physical, I want a boat, so I'm going to make this crystal grid. But no shame on wanting boats though. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah.
But I think there's another way of doing it. And I think this is the way, Iris, that you're really tapping into, where it's not necessarily that you are like, I have an intention, and so I'm going to create this thing to communicate and manifest it. It's almost the opposite. It's I'm opening myself up to what the universe wants to communicate through me, through sacred geometry and through the crystals, right? So, I was looking at some of your stuff too. And even, just like over the past, few years, you make a grid, and it's so beautiful because it is very intuitive. It's very opposite the way that I do it. Yours is so beautiful, and there's a flow to it that's really lovely. And it always seems like you're like, what does the universe want me to anchor in a way? Like, what does the universe want to express through me? What does the universe really want? Think that the human collective needs right now. And so you'll just be guided by your intuition, and you'll create this beautiful grid. And it's almost like it's the opposite. It's the universe is communicating through you what it wants to manifest. And so
it's so funny too, because I didn't even consciously realize that until I was doing the grids and sharing them, and people were telling me like, oh my God, like this brought tears to my eyes. I needed to, like, this helped me so much. And I feel like me and you have always been in tune in that way when it comes to choosing crystals. So obviously Jillian and I,
for those of you listening in, so we can't even count the number of times that we would each be doing live sales. And like the minute I would go to post something on Instagram to tell my followers that I was going to have something on our live sale table, I would open Instagram and Iris would have literally just posted the same exact crystal. And one of the things that I really loved is that for some people, they might be like, oh no, they're posting it, like, I'm not going to sell as much. Like there's that scarcity mindset. But for us, we literally always laughed like, well, it's happened again. I guess the universe
both offering it this week.
really needs this out in the world, I guess.
It was almost the affirmation of like, okay, well, obviously I intuitively knew, so this is what people are needing. It's always been so fun. And it's funny because Jillian and I are obviously, now that we're doing the podcast together, we've been creating this over the past, now 8 months or however many months it's been, we've gotten a lot closer. But at the time, this has happened for years. So we weren't even that close. It was like, we knew each other, we'd see each other at jump shows, but it was like, we're both,
we would just like, I think our entire like DM feed was like sending each other our own things, like, well, happened again.
Yeah. So funny how that works. But yeah, so you can do it either way. You can specifically think like, hey, I'm really wanting to bring in more love into my space. And if you have crystals that are, pink crystals are always going to be good for that. But it can be the opposite. Because that's really how I choose my crystals each day to work with. It's never, at least for me personally, it's very rarely that I go in to choose a crystal to work with for the day, knowing ahead of time, like I need grounding. I go in and I look at all my crystals and like this one, and I'm feeling called to this one. And then later on, it'll it'll like come to my awareness of like, oh yeah, no wonder I chose those. So you can do it either way. And as we said in our like very first episode together, there's no wrong way. There really isn't. So whichever way you prefer is totally fine and beautiful.
So I have, it's not like a question, but just a little mini exploration of why Iris would you use a crystal grid? For what potential purposes could you use a crystal grid?
So
besides, intuiting the will of the universe.
Yeah. I'm just going to say for me personally, and then I can also like elaborate too, which I think you're going to be good at, like more your route of why. But for me, it was always it was twofold, a form of meditation. Because you really just get in tune, you quiet your mind and you really get in tune with arranging the crystals. And like, I would arrange them like, that doesn't feel right. And then change it and then add a different one. And like, oh, this one needs a small one. So I'd go through my drawers and like add in little intricacies. So for me, it's been my way to meditate because I'm not really good at the type of meditation where you sit and try and think of nothing. For me, it's a form of meditation and also expressing creativity. We as humans are creative beings it's part of our natural way of being, but we get so busy with life that creativity always gets pushed on the wayside. So it's another way for me to express my own creativity and then to stand back when you're done. Because for me, it's like I get in the zone, I'm doing it. That's all I'm focused on. Like I said, it's a form of meditation. And then you stand back and look at what you've created and you're like, I created that? Wow. Like it's just this, just such a great feeling. And I love it. And that's why I personally would create a crystal grid, is to meditate, to express creativity, and to see the beauty. And then on top of it, you get all the benefits of whatever crystals you end up choosing, because no matter what crystal you're choosing, there's benefits. So how about you? Why would you, Jillian, create a crystal grid?
I mean, I use crystal grids a lot. Actually, when I first kind of came back to crystals as an adult, that was actually the first thing that I started doing, besides like, like holding the crystal and talking to it, is I just like dove straight into crystal gridding. I had where we used to live, there was we actually had like a batch elder fireplace for those of you. It's like, there was this particular style of tiled fireplace from like the early 1900s to like the 1920s that was like really famous in Los Angeles. And we had a little baby duplex, and they actually had batch elder fireplaces. But it was a non-working fireplace by the time, we moved in. And so I would use the tiled out fireplace as my grid, because it was literally like a bunch of squares. So they had all these indices. And so I would use that as like my giant like checkerboard for gridding, my giant grid board. And so interestingly, I think my very first crystal grid was actually for synchronicities. And I had like labradorite and moonstone, and I think I had indigo gabbro and merlinite. Like I had all these like great crystals that are good for synchronicities. And I don't remember why that was my first one, but I don't know.
So you had planned out, like, I want more synchronicities in my life.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
And so, and I will say that it definitely worked. And so generally when I make crystal grids, I will know my intention, and like that will be my starting point. So like various crystal grids I've made throughout, at least, the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, however long I've been doing this, have been from as simple as being able to like really harness my own power to manifest. Like even that I made a crystal grid for that.
Yeah.
Or
it should almost be a slogan. There's a crystal grid for that.
There's a crystal. There is a crystal for that. So I think another one I did was, bringing more community together. I think I did another one for bringing wealth and abundance, because I was like really strapped up at the time and I needed money to come in. Another one I think that I did was I needed to, so before we had our duplex, I had like a little condo, and we needed to sell the condo. And it was not moving. It was just like sitting there, and it was not moving. Like it was in a really prime area. It should have like been snapped up, and it wasn't. Partly because I think they were building a giant apartment building next door, or condo building next door. So like all my light had disappeared. But I needed to sell it, and I made a crystal grid, and I actually made it with Fibonacci sequence. So it was like really had that moving energy to it, right? That spiral flowing, moving energy. So I really wanted like movement to happen. And I kid you not, the next day we got our first offer.
Oh my goodness.
Literally like 24 hours later. So,
well, if you think about it in multiple steps, right? We as humans can manifest. Like there's so much on the internet now about manifesting and the power of thought, right? So we as humans can manifest. And then you tie in crystals and their energy in general, even just working with a crystal, clear quartz, and you want to, attune it to whatever your intention is. So there's two things. And then you add in a crystal grid, which is multiple crystals with all these beautiful energies. And we talked, Jillian explained it really well in our, Crystals 101, or one of our first episodes on crystals, of how crystals actually scientifically work. So if you're listening to it and you haven't listened to this episode, and you haven't listened to that one, listen to it. But the power of all, essentially three combined. It's you and your thoughts. It's the crystal, but then multiple crystals on top of it. And then you're speaking in the language of the universe. How powerful.
Exactly.
Everyone, make a crystal grid. What are you looking for in your life? Do it now. No.
I know. Yeah. But I think the idea is that whether you are doing it as a meditation, or doing it as a way to commune with your stones, or doing it as a way to channel the universe, right? Some people, here's the thing, we all have the ability to channel, we just do it differently. So some people, like literally their minds go somewhere else and they trans channel and like voices speak through them. Some people, they just get like pings and they know. And some people, like, this is another way that you can channel the will of the universe, the creation, And I love that's what you do, Iris. I also love that you brought up this, that it's a means of creativity, especially because right now with a lot of the apps that we have with technology, we are really entering this phase where we have all of this information, but it's all very shallow. We're constantly being distracted. And so we're not creating as much, or it's superficial creation. And so being able to get into that zone of creation is such a neat way to really tactilely, like physically embody creation. Especially for someone like me, who I am not like a hands-on type of creative. That is not my skill set. Like, you try to get me to like carve something or paint something or sketch something, it's just going to be an absolute giant mess. But because I'm working with the stones, right? There's still an element of creation in it. Even if I'm coming to it, like I have an intention, I don't know exactly what the grid's going to look like to start off with. I have to like tap in, like what still feels right for my intention, what is aligned with that, what stones want to be involved. And so there's still that element of like, I get to create a thing that's going to go out. It's going to, speak itself into the world, so to speak.
Right. And then too, there are, which I haven't worked with, but obviously there's plenty of crystal gridding books, but there's actual layouts, right?
Yes.
So that's the other thing too, is if you're like, oh, well, I don't feel like I'm a creative person. Creativity lies deep within. It just needs to be cultivated, just like a muscle. And so what's really cool is there are different layouts that you can look at the layout and say, okay, then I'm going to arrange my crystals in this way. And the more you begin to do that, and then you try a different layout, and then you try a different, and the more you do it, you're developing that muscle. And eventually you can, if you want to, take away the layout and create your own. So I think I know that you said that you're not creative, but I know you are. You like to color.
Oh no, I'm definitely creative. I'm just like, I can't like physically make things with my hands.
That's got it. Okay. I'm not like definitely very creative.
Thank you. Yes.
In multiple ways.
With that.
Yes.
I do like to color. Coloring is my thing. And actually, my favorite coloring book is a sacred geometry coloring book.
That makes sense.
I will put in the show notes, because I swear to God, this is the best coloring book for adults I have ever found. I love it. I literally just ordered a second one because I finished it. So now I'm going to start over again with new colors. Fun. But it's my favorite. Well, it's my favorite way to chill out.
Let's talk a little bit about the surface.
Yes. Yeah. Let's dive into some specifics here.
Yeah. Like on what type of surface you can do your crystal grids. And I love this question because it's, again, go ahead.
Yes. No. That's an excellent question. So I will say pretty much anything with some caveats. So I would say like wood could be really great, especially if you want to do a grounding type of, you can also align the surface to match your intention with your grid. You don't have to. But like wood is fantastic. Selenite, if then you always have that like clearing energy. Glass is amazing too, because then you get that like reflection and it looks really beautiful. I would say the main thing is that one, it is not an electronic surface or next to a lot of electronics. And that's because the EMFs from like Wi-Fi routers, or if you've got like, I wouldn't set up your crystal grid next to like where all of your computer stuff is necessarily. There are some exceptions to that, like tourmalines and, lead included crystals like shungite, which is a carbon. Those are all actually okay to use around EMFs, but generally EMFs will disrupt the energy torus of the crystal grid. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, but you're creating an energy torus with your crystal grid. And so when you have a bunch of EMFs passing through it, it just gets disrupted. And then it's not as stable, which is, you want it to be stable. So I wouldn't do that.
So, yeah. And
then I would say one of the other things is just to make sure that your grid is in a place that feels sacred or separate to you. Right. So like for me, I have like my living room, and I actually have like a little shelf, like a small shelving unit. And that's where I have a lot of my sacred things. I've got candles. That's where I keep my decks. I have, and that's where I have my main crystal grid of the season, or for whatever I'm calling in the moment. So make sure that it's a place that you can, it's not like in a closet tucked away, hidden somewhere. Because it's something that you want to be reminded and see every day, but it's still someplace that feels sacred to you.
And I would say just two things: flat surface.
Yeah, flat's good too.
Flat surface, and then somewhere that's not going to get bumped a lot.
Yes.
So, something that's pretty much non-moving, because you don't want your crystals rolling off, and not that in an area that gets high traffic to where it'll get bumped and knocked over.
Yes.
If that's the case, it's fine. You can reset it up, but it's just less work for you if you don't have to reset it up.
This is a question that I've actually gotten of like, my cat jumped through my crystal grid. What am I going to do? And it's like, it's fine.
It's fine. So just reset it up.
Yeah, reset it up. And I would say, like, check in intuitively with the crystal grid. So if it's completely ruined, then like I would say reset it back up, reset your intention, which again we'll talk about later in the episode, how to intentionally charge. So redo the whole process again. If it like one got knocked over, reset it up, maybe like send a little bit of energy to it. It's probably fine.
And you'll probably notice because you mentioned the cat, your animals are drawn to crystals. And so you probably will notice if you have pets that they end up messing it up because they want to be near it as well. Anubis was notorious for this before live sales. I would set up my grid with all the pretty crystals and leave the office, come back in, and he's laying on top of it just like, oh, thanks for making this for me.
See, and my dog was the complete opposite. When I first set something up, especially when we lived where we were before, right? It was it was like a step up, but it basically was on the ground.
Yeah.
And whenever I set up a new crystal grid, she would come. She's also a very delicate little pup, but she would like come up and she would kind of like sniff along the outside, and then she'd be like, "All right, this is here." And then she would completely leave it alone.
Oh wow, that's nice.
She never walked through it. She was always like, she understood. I go around it. It's fine. Yeah.
That just goes back to Anubis thinking he's the god of everything. And like, oh, you must have made this for me.
Yes. But anyway. Missy's always been very, very dainty about things. And she's also been very good about like, this is an editor. Like, she's very good when something is like a sacred space. She's like, I will be near it, but I don't need to be in it.
Aww,
like, this is a thing that's set up and I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. That's very awesome.
Interesting. I will also say, since we're talking about spaces, that the crystal grid should have its own space. So I know for some people there might be a tendency to like, I want to manifest a zillion things. Let me like fill this whole room with crystal grids. The energy torus of a crystal grid is larger than the sum of its parts. So especially depending on the crystals and depending on the size of the crystals and depending on the size of the grid, this can be pretty massive. And energetically, if you're someone who can feel energy, and again, we all experience energy differently, but if you feel energy, you probably will be able to tell the size of the energy torus and how like kind of the edges of it. So the bulk.
That's so interesting you say that, because I intuitively I never thought that, but I've always felt that. Like I will create some grids next to each other, but most of the time it's like just the one. The one is good enough. Because it's like you said, energetically taking up space, and you don't want them like
you don't want them like disrupting each other. One of my favorite images is of like a drop of water, right? So if you drop a stone into a pond and it creates those ripples, right? If you drop a stone into a pond, it creates ripples, and then you drop another stone into a pond slightly far away, and it creates more ripples. Those ripples can cancel each other out. So this is also with the EMF wave. So you just want to make sure it has its own space, because you don't want the universe getting confused because you're having like ripples that are hitting each other and like canceling each other out. Right. So I think a good rule of thumb is one, like if you want multiple crystal grids, awesome. Maybe like one per room is probably
separating them out.
I wouldn't do any more than I would say that's at most. So I totally understand having one like in your sacred space. or in your living room, and then maybe you want another one because you're having trouble sleeping. So you create a crystal grid in your bedroom, or you want to like bring more passion into your life. So you have one in your bedroom. Like that makes total sense. Just, you don't need to go overboard, because the other thing is it still requires, and again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it still requires energy from you, right? You still initiated this. So you still have to kind of do the upkeep for all these different crystal grids. So you don't want to overwhelm yourself and like diminish your own energy with the things you want to manifest. So like maybe just like a couple at a time.
Yeah. Or, or even just one.
Or even just one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Try with one, see how you feel.
Yeah. Now I am curious, because you said about leaving the crystal, like you have a crystal grid up in your sacred space. Mm-hmm. So do you personally leave it up for how long?
Depends on the grid. So usually I will keep a crystal grid up until the thing that I am manifesting is accomplished, or until I feel like it's no longer relevant.
Okay.
So for instance, with the moving of the house, right, the selling of the condo, I ended up taking it down the day that the papers were signed, because it was done.
Yeah.
But I've also had crystal grids maybe that are a little less specific, and like, so I made a crystal grid, I would say like not this summer, but I think a little over a year ago, I had a crystal grid that was specifically to help me or support me embodying what it means to be a manifester in human design, because there's a lot of conditioning. There's very few of us in the world, so there's not a lot of people to look towards. There's it's like the way we move through the world is very opposite to the way that most people move through the world, and so I was having a lot of trouble with this because I've been so conditioned to work oppositely. So I made a crystal grid for that. I think I had that up for probably almost a year, because it was something it was constantly little shifts here, little shifts there, a little bit of deconditioning here, a little bit there. And then I finally ended up joining this really amazing program. If you are also a human design manifester, I would look up Holly Marie or the Manifester community. It's literally, she built this entire community of just manifestors, and she's got amazing courses. And so I'm actually in a course right now, and it's literally just learning everything about human design. You actually end up being certified to be a human design reader, but it's geared specifically towards manifestors. And that, since I've started, like, that deconditioning process has been absolutely incredible. I feel like the way I move through life in the last 6 months has completely changed. The way that I manifest has completely changed. And so I know I'm not finished with this journey. This is going to be a lifelong journey, but I knew I got what I needed, right? I needed a community of manifestors that I could talk to about, like, what I'm experiencing and have that reflected back to me. And I knew that I'm now in a place where I really can learn. Like, I don't need the crystal grid for that anymore. It got me into this. It got me to the place where I can finally move forward. So, like, I finally took that one down, and I said so many thank yous. But it took a while, it took a while to get there. And so
that's so cool, because I'm really having a good time, like, just asking you questions, because we do things so differently. And it's I never really thought of, or even how you were talking about the flow of how the crystals were laid out when you were trying to sell your apartment or condo or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. Like, that's so interesting, because this entire time I've just arranged things just flowing into it. But to see these, like, that would make so much sense to leave the grid up until you manifest what you're wanting to manifest, which again goes back to having it in a place that doesn't get bumped and whatnot. But how cool.
And that's the thing is, there's, if you're doing it more intuitively led, which you can still approach something like, I have an intention, I'm just going to intuitively put this together. Amazing. Great. But there are a lot, and this is, a very easy, like, sacred geometry shapes, like, very easy Google. There's lots of information out there. but there are a number of basic shapes that you can start off with. If anyone is interested, on our website, we have crystal gridding boards if you want something to like start off with. Yeah. So it's like literally like wooden boards, and they have different geometric shapes on them. So you can use them in the interstices, right? Like where the lines cross, or you could put them in the spaces between. So there's a lot of ways you could play with it, but you kind of like have a little blueprint to start off with.
That's really cool. That's a good idea.
Yeah. So that's something we've been carrying for a couple years, probably maybe 3 to 4 years, because I love crystal gridding so much. And I was like, I want the world to be able to do this easily.
Yeah, that's so cool.
But some of the shapes that are really well known are like Merkabas, for instance, right? So especially if you are wanting to, or your manifestation is more about like spiritual expansion or lucid dreaming or astral travel, anything to do with like that, Merkabas are going to be a really great shape to go to. Or I would say, you know, if you want movement, right, energetic movement, and that could be for healing, or that could be like, I want to move to a different country, or, you know, anything that doesn't involve being stationary. I really like Fibonacci sequence. It's the sacred spiral, which is the one I used for the for selling the condo. I will also say one of the most popular ones is the flower of life or seed of life, and that one really can be used for anything. Like that's probably the most common, like basic crystal grid outline, because it's hexagonal, so it matches quartz as well. Yeah. So it really, any type of quartz stone, it really resonates with that very, very well. If you want to bring in like safety, for instance, or like protection, using a basic square is amazing. Yeah. Right? Because that is like solid and safe. There's like that primal image of like a house is like literally like a rectangle, right? Or a square. So
square, yeah.
So that's, you know, so there's you can go very simple or you can go very complex, but you can always do like a very easy Google of different sacred shapes and see how they feel to you is another great way to really
That's a good idea
that.
too, is even if you're not sure, just go and Google the images and be like, you know what? This one is calling me. And then you can by all means look up what that specific shape means. But again, going inward and feeling out like, what am I drawn to? Can be always helpful, because you'll be surprised at how often you're like, oh, well, no wonder.
Yes. Yeah. And for those of you who are like, this was brought up to me more in terms of those who are like practicing witches, for instance. Direction is really important. Some cultures, like, direction is not as important. Some cultures, it's very, very important. So if you are one that thinks, you know, that believes directionality is incredibly important, that's another thing that you can incorporate, right? Is aligning the crystal grid to, not all crystal grids, let's say, have a top and a bottom, because most of them are like either mirroring each other or they're, you know, relatively circular in shape. But aligning it to the directional spokes of the compass, right? So like the different points really align with north and south and east and west, is another way to really tap into those energetic ley lines of the earth. So if that's something you really connect to, that's another powerful way of layering in even more energy and even more intentionality. So that's another thing you can do.
That's not, again, something I've never even heard of, aligning in that way. So all these little fun tidbits.
I know.
So cool.
I know.
Okay, so let's say you lay out your grid. You've chosen your crystals, you've chosen your layout. Now you have them laid out in whatever space that is. Now what?
All right. So this is where we get into the nitty gritty of how to make a crystal grid. And I will say, first of all, this is ascribing a little bit more to the first way we were talking about it, right? Where like, you've made a choice, you're going to do this thing. So I like to think of crystal gridding a little bit like composing music, right? When you first start, it's beneficial to learn all the rules. And then as you get comfortable with it, then you can just start breaking them if your intuition calls for it. But I will say, if you're just starting off, it's nice to follow the recipe, so to speak, because then you can get used to what a crystal grid feels like, and then you can start playing with it. But always use your own intuition. So the basics of a crystal grid have a few component parts, which are the center stone, the surrounding stone, and then, or surrounding stones, I guess I should say, and then amplification stones, which could be used or not used, and then anything else you would like to include. And again, some crystal grids, especially if you see a lot of Iris's crystal grids, they don't look like this. And that's totally okay. This is a way to make traditional crystal grids versus more intuitively led crystal grids. And some of the most beautiful ones I've ever seen on Instagram are not ones that subscribe to this. So keep that in mind. But for the basics of a crystal grid, the first thing that you want to pick is your center stone. So just like living things, crystals have auras, which is also known as an energy torus. So if you were to look at this in Kirlian photography or, whatever science enables us to look at energy, it basically looks like an invisible, constantly moving donut of energy. So for like, yeah. So
now I'm hungry.
So for if you were looking at a human being, right? So our chakra line serves as the central axis. So like it goes up, it goes back down to the earth, it comes back up, it goes back down to the earth. So it's this constantly like inner rotating, outer rotating donut of energy. So when you're making a crystal grid, the center stone basically acts as the anchor for the crystal grid's energy torus. So it's like the antenna, shall we say. So it's broadcasting your intention out into the universe. So the center stone should typically be the largest piece in the entire grid, or if it's not the largest piece, the highest vibrational piece. So for instance, you could use like Herkimer diamonds, which tend to be really, really tiny, but they're like really powerful. So, either way, but typically it should be your largest stone since it's acting as the antenna. And a lot of people will use quartz, but you can also use any energetically aligned stone that, matches your intention. So what we talked about before, if you wanted to create a crystal grid to bring more love into your life, whatever type of love, rose quartz would be a really great center conductor. If you wanted to call in more protection, let's say, then black tourmaline would probably be like a really good bet. So center stone, either quartz or aligned with your intention, the largest of all of the crystals in your grid. Now, the second ingredient are the surrounding stones. And these are the stones that will be arranged in the geometric shape around the center stone. So how many you'll need will really depend on how simple or how complex you want to make the grid, as well as the basic shape you've chosen. So for instance, if you were making a square for protection, right? You have your black tourmaline, you probably at minimum you would need 4 because you need to like create the corners of your square. So you have your center stone and then 4 surrounding stones. But you could also make this super complex and like outline the entire square and then have like radial lines coming out. Like you can just add and add and add and add. For a basic flower of life or seed of life, you have your center stone and then you would have 6 radiating off of it. So you would need a minimum of 6 plus your center stone. And again, this can get really complex. I've seen some flower of lives that have like hundreds of stones that are really big and amazing.
And I know I went on because as we're thinking of crystal grids, and I know you follow them too, because I went on to like look at them again. You guys have to check out Sister Spark crystal grids. Oh,
they're amazing.
My God. For years I've been following them. They have the most intricate, beautiful.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Thought out. Oh my God. You go check it out. I'm going to link it in the show notes too, even like,
yes. Yeah, anyway. There's a couple, there's another one that I can't remember the name of, but I will link it. There's like 2 or 3 that make amazing crystal grids on Instagram and they're just so inspiring and beautiful. And like sometimes they'll be really like geometric, and sometimes they'll be really intuitive. And so, but you can get a lot of beautiful inspirations from that. So we'll link those couple accounts in the show notes as well, because they're just stunning.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got your center stone, right? You've got your antenna. You have the surrounding stones. So, and these also act as the modifier to your crystal grid. So for instance, the rose quartz love grid that we were talking about. So if you wanted the love to be more about calling in, not just calling in more love, but you want to call in your soulmate. And granted, I can't always guarantee that this will work, because soulmates come when they come, but don't try to control people, friends. But if you're just like, I just want to open myself up to my soulmate. I'm like, I feel like I'm closed. My doors have been closed, and I just want to like, let the universe know I am open for this. So you'd have your rose quartz in the center, and maybe for surrounding stones, you would choose Larimar to call in your soulmate. But maybe for your love, it's like you want to open yourself back up to having loving relationships with maybe estranged family members, right? Then you would use rhodochrosite in your grid. So it really depends. You know, it's almost like they're like the flavor, right? They're the nuances of.
I feel like it's almost really like the title of a book.
Yes,
and then the rest of the stuff that ties along in with the title.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Or even like the summary, like the center stone's like the summary, and then like the actual prose or poetry is the surrounding stones.
Yeah.
Right? It's the flavor. So that's, you know, so those act as the modifiers. And maybe, and it also, even if you were just like, I just want more love, like I just want to like be more loving and have more love in my life, you could just do all rose quartz, right? Like you don't have to have any modifiers. But this is where you can also get really, you know, fun, and where I personally have a lot of fun, because I want a little bit of this, and I want a little bit of
like
that, and I want a little bit of this. And it's like, I'm like concocting my little soup here. So I love that. So I'll have my like center stone, but I will also, like, my one I've got set up right now is, I won't talk about what it is, but like I've got sunstone as the center, and then I'm like looking over at it. I've got like citrine, and I've got green calcite, and I've got honey calcite, and I've got a little bit more sunstone to just activate. Oh, and I've got astrophyllite, and I've got like all these like things in it.
It's like ingredients in a recipe. You're making a recipe for the universe. And
that doesn't necessarily mean that more is necessarily more. Right. Like, again, you're using your intuition. You don't need to like go overboard. Right. I know in Hibiscus Moon, in her book, she usually recommends no more than 3, because otherwise it can get more muddled. And I would say like, sometimes that feels appropriate for me. And sometimes I'm like, all the crystals. Yeah. So it just depends. If it feels right for you, amazing. Go for it. So now we've got our center stone, right? We've got our antenna. We've got, which is like the main body aligned with your intention, or clear quartz. You can always use clear quartz. Then you have your surrounding stones, which are, the possibilities are really endless. And these act not just as modifiers to your intention, right? The subtle specificities of your intention, but they also act like satellites, right? So they're receiving and broadcasting your intention out into the world. So, right, because you have your center stone, because we have an energy torus. So it's like going like this. So it comes out from the center, it's picking back up all of those surrounding stones, going back into the center, picking up. So it's like always amplifying over and over and over again, which then leads me to the third ingredient, which is not necessary, but if you want to include it, and these are amplification stones. Amplification stones typically are always going to be quartz. Almost always quartz. I would say maybe an exception to that is if you've got a crystal grid made of only calcites, then maybe you could use like white calcite, for instance, just because it's really energetically aligned with it, and also like molecularly aligned because it's the same stone. But typically you're going to use quartz, and you can use quartz points. You can use tumbles, whatever shape feels right to you. But quartz, as we've talked about before, it's inherently an amplification stone. as well as a stone that holds intention. So with these stones, we were kind of getting both. So these little amplification stones can be placed either like around the outer grid, or so like you have your center stone, you've got your surrounding stones, and then like a third layer around it of amplification stones. Or you can alternatively place them in geometric points between the surrounding stones. Either way. So they're not necessary, but because quartz is holding those intentions, it also transmits, amplifies, and powers up the grid even more. So you're just kind of like adding that extra oomph to it. So we have the center stone, the surrounding stones, the amplification stones.
And then my next favorite part.
Yes, the next favorite part,
this one, I'm like,
which is basically anything you want to include at all, except for like electronic devices.
So flower petals, leaves, pine needles. As you can tell, I always like go out in nature. Shells. Yeah, literally, I love going in nature, especially when I was during COVID, I was making grids up the wazoo. And like, that was one of my main things, was like going and like picking things from my garden, and multiple, even like grass blades, just to like accentuate the grid. It just makes it even more beautiful. Anyway, so that's what usually I'm including, is always like nature stuff, either flowers, flower petals, whatever. Yes. But I didn't realize that you can even do other things that are special to you. You want to go?
Yeah. So you could include mementos. As long as it's aligned. One of my favorite things, and this is actually what I did, I'm just going to keep going back to it because it's a very specific, it was like one of my crystal grids that I've done for like a very specific thing versus more nebulous things. But when I was selling the condo, I printed out one of the pictures, what I thought was the best picture from our Zillow listing. And I actually put it underneath the crystal grid. So that actually, so the spiral crystal grid that I built was actually on top of a photograph of it. So it was very clear, like, this is the thing I want to move. This is the thing
there's like no guesswork for the universe.
Exactly.
The universe like, okay, here you go.
Exactly. So another way that you could utilize this, for instance, is if you've got someone who maybe isn't feeling well, like maybe they're ill, right? And you want to make a crystal grid to help them feel better. First of all, always have their permission before you do this, but you can include a picture of the person. And if you do, I will also say, include a picture of them vibrant and healthy. Don't include the picture of them when they're ill, because then that's what you're putting out to the universe to continue. So a picture of them vibrant and healthy, or a memento that makes you think of them, or, whatever it might be. So you can really, the possibilities here are really endless, as long as it feels energetically aligned. And if it involves another person, you have permission.
I love that idea. That is so cool. I never thought of adding a photo.
Yeah.
But I'm already thinking of all the things, all the crystal grids I'm going to make.
Yeah.
This is so fun.
And it doesn't always have to be a photo too. It could be something that you've written, right? Like maybe you want to reconnect with someone, right? And they wrote you a letter at one point in time. You could put that under there. Again, like maybe you can't ask them for permission, but you can also include in the intention, like if it's in my highest alignment, then I would like to reconnect with this person, right? There's always like the nuances that you can put in there, but,
or even writing out what it is you're wanting to manifest.
Oh, 100%. Especially like if you're a person.
I want to manifest my soulmate, if you're doing that grid, and putting that underneath, like whatever it is.
Or putting your list of like, this is what I want in a person, and being very, like if you're a specific person, or if you're a less specific person, like this is how I want to feel all the time in my relationship.
Yeah.
Right. So you can write that out. So you can take those like things that you normally would burn, right? That you write out and burn. You could take that and put it under your crystal grid. And then once it's done, then burn it. Right. Because it happened. So it's another way of communicating with the universe in a way that people are already doing for manifestation. It's just you're tapping into the energy of crystals and sacred geometry to boost that.
And I will say, since we keep talking about manifesting, check out our bonus episode. If you scroll on, it's either, if you're not on Apple Podcasts, just go to our website. You can subscribe to our private podcast. But if you are on Apple, it is now up on there where you can subscribe there to get all our bonus content. And we did an episode on manifesting, what it is, all the different ways you can do it. So just a little shameless plug there.
Wasn't shameless. It was fine. It was lovely. It was a nice plug. It was a sweet plug.
Sweet plug. All right. So now we have all the things on our grid.
Yes. And you have made your crystal grid.
Yes.
So
with all the little additions.
You have arranged the crystal grid. So now what has to happen is you have to, let's say, power up, for lack of a better term, right? So you don't just like set it up and like, cool, I'm done. Bye. You have to like, this is still coming from you. So it has to come from you. So you have your crystal grid set up. You need to activate it. And to do this, again, use your intuition, always use your intuition. But some people like to use like a crystal wand specifically. Iris, I'm sure, has ideas on like what the best formation is for this. Or you could also use a pendulum. You could use a metal wand. You could use your bare hands. I personally actually typically use my bare hands just because I feel energy. And so it makes it easier for me to like feel what's happening as opposed to having the crystal in my hand. Because then I'm just
actually use incense.
Ooh, I love that.
I do like my little spirals around it.
I love that because then you really get to you really visualize what's happening. Yeah. I love that. I never thought of that. I might try that. Anyway, so if you're using your wand or your incense, whatever it is, you're just really imagining it as an extension of your own energy field. So make sure you clear that first if you are using a tool. Connect with it. Imagine it being an extension of your own energy field that you're going to be using to amplify and transmit your intention to the grid in the same way that like when you have a crystal that you're working with, right? And you'll hold it in your hands. I have my little unicorn stone heart here. You hold it in your hands and you, depending on the person, right? Like you speak aloud or you talk to the crystal, internally, and you say, like, this is what I really need. This is my intention. This is what I want to work on together. So you do the same thing with your grid. So what I recommend is before activating your grid, it's best to come up with a very clear, relatively concise, if you can. I'm a verbose person, so it's hard for me to do that part, but clear, concise statement in the positive, right? You don't want to say, I never want to feel pain again, because
you're focusing on the pain.
You're focusing on the pain as opposed to how you actually want to feel, right? So a clear, concise statement that's in the positive for what you want to manifest. And if you would like, you could write this down and put it underneath your crystal grid, or you don't have to, up to you. So once you have that, I generally recommend meditating or just doing whatever you normally do for yourself to kind of get yourself into that like manifestation brainwave state. I know it's different for different people, but I personally like meditate a little bit beforehand. I really like to imagine my life, like what it's going to be like with this thing finally manifested, how I can start feeling that way now, what changes can I make now, things like that.
And I would say also try and when you're doing this, being in a space of like solitude and more zen.
Yes.
Not somewhere where you're like in a kitchen where everyone's running around and talking and
all 100%.
So in your own space, I like to put on like very relaxing music. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Deva Premal. She is a beautiful artist with a beautiful voice. She is so great or I'll put on, there's another artist, what is it? Deadova, just like those types of like Zen, whatever. Or you can even just, I don't know, put on music for meditation. Yeah. But, or whatever gets you in the zone. You. Exactly.
Yes. So you want to be in the zone.
Yeah.
Okay. So then once you have your statement, you're in the zone, repeat the statement out loud, right? Talk to the universe, talk to the crystals. And as you're repeating this statement out loud over and over again, you direct your wand or hand, I use my hands, to the center stone, right? So like, here's, for those of you watching, I'm like holding my hands up, right? It's like imagining the stone is between, I'll use my microphone. Pretending my microphone is the crystal, right? So have your hands like slightly away or touching the crystal, whatever you want. Or if you have a wand, then you could be like literally touching that crystal with your wand and visualize it lighting up with your intention, or however you want to visualize it. Like it's glowing, it's radiating, it's shooting off sparks, whatever works for you, whatever your brain conjures up is beautiful. But visualize it lighting up with your intention and the influx of energy that's coming from you. Then you go around and you kind of like, for lack of a better term, you connect the dots, right? With you and your wand. Your wand or your hand, like hovering over each crystal in the grid. For me, I personally like visualizing a web, like a fine web of energy. And so with each stone, when I get to it, lighting up as they connect to form this like beautiful little lit up electric grid almost. And then once they're all connected, visualize the energy torus around it getting larger and larger and larger. You want this to be like as big as it is meant to be and as like beautiful as possible. So when I finally feel the time is right, and like sometimes for me, that's like 2 minutes. And sometimes for me, that's like 5 minutes. It just kind of depends, maybe 30 seconds, who knows? But when you feel the time is right, conclude by expressing gratitude for the crystals and the universe's support. Whew, I know that was a lot, but basically,
I love that.
You just, imagine the crystals lighting up with your intention and then like connected to each other is like the very short version of it.
And I love the process too of thanking the crystals and thanking the universe, because I think a lot of us, or a lot of people in general, when they're using crystals, right? We're using them.
I know. But I hate that term. I wish there was better terms.
Yeah, but it's like, what those are. This crystal is not only energetically helping, again, you need to listen to the first episode where Jillian explained the science of crystals and how they work. But this crystal is helping you. It's helping you energetically to uplift yourself. And on top of it, it's partnering with you. And on top of it, it's helping you to manifest. With these grids, you're manifesting what you want to bring into your life, thanking them for it. Think of it as a person or a friend, and you just always use them all the time. Like, how would you feel if they're like, oh, I want this and I want that and I want that and I want that. And you give it to them, and then it's like they're on their merry way. So giving that acknowledgement to the crystals and them helping you in your journey, even if you don't believe in them being their own being, it's a good practice to have, to essentially thank the land. It's their nature. It's thanking Mother Nature, universe, all of that. So I think it's important.
Yeah, 100%. So now you have set up your grid. You've activated your grid. What do you do now?
You
basically,
leave it.
I know. No, you don't do that. So I think with crystal grids, and I will say I sometimes do this because life gets busy and life gets busy. So this happens to me as well. But when a crystal grid is made, it's not a set and forget. It's not like, I did this thing, now it's going to manifest. Like, no.
I think it goes back to manifesting in general. It's like you don't just tell the universe, okay, this is what I want, and walk away and forget about it and get mad about it a month later when it hasn't come to you. Exactly. There's your process to get it to manifest, which is your work, your intentions, your revisiting.
Yes. And so, because of that, it's in partnership with you. So that means like, it can't do all the heavy lifting by itself. Like in the end, they're just rocks. Like they're trying their best, but like you got to do your half. So it's not something you can just like set and forget. So what I typically recommend is, if you can, and I understand lives get busy. So when you can, putting a little bit of energy each day to the crystal grid. And that could look like holding your hands over the crystal grid and visualize you sending energy, like a little bit of boost. So they like brightens up a little bit, in your mind's eye. So, reinforcing that intention, or thanking the crystal grid for its help every single day, before you go to bed. And of course, like, we are energetic beings. You don't always have to physically be there. Like if you're traveling, you can just send the energy, like it'll still go. We live in a quantum universe, so that is totally fine. But
or even Bree saying out loud what your intention for that grid was, just kind of, or whatever tool you used previously. Like for me, it's incense. If you have a moment, whether it's your wand or your incense,
retracing
reignite it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's just putting a little bit of energy back to the grid, a little bit of gratitude back to the grid every single day, right? Because it is working in partnership with you. And then I will say, I mean, a little bit, you don't need to like do the whole rigmarole. Like a little bit can go a long, long way. So it's just a little bit. You don't need to stress yourself out about it. If you miss a day, it's fine. But it's just showing the universe, like, you will still take the steps necessary to do this, right? And that's another big part of this is being aware of what can I do? Like, I want this to come in. So, and this is a perfect example. So when we sold the condo, or when I made the crystal grid for the condo, we got in our very first offer in 24 hours, and it was lower than I wanted. So I didn't take it. And these people were lovely. They like wrote a whole letter about how much they want, like they loved the space and they wanted to cherish it and build their, like it was a couple and their dog, and they really saw themselves like living here, and they talked like, but it was lower than I wanted. So I countered, and they were like, we can't afford that. And they dropped out, and it took another month before we got another offer. So that's the thing, is like, the universe is like, okay, here it is. Here's the perfect people, but it may look different than you anticipated. And so I was like, no, I don't want this. And the universe was like, okay, well, it's going to be a while. And in the end, the person who ended up getting it actually ended up negotiating less for what the initial couple offered. So I still didn't make as much. So another thing to remember is like, you still have to do the work. When the universe brings you things, you still have to say, okay, thank you. You know, if it really doesn't feel aligned, fine. But like, be really aware when the universe is bringing you things, it may actually be for you, even if it isn't exactly the way that you anticipated or the way that you thought you wanted it. It still might actually 100%. Be the best thing for you.
Right.
And that 100%. You still have to do your part of the bargain. You still have to do your part of the work. So that's another thing I will say, you know, like, these are powerful, magical things. But these practices are still a practice, and that means you have to do it. It's not like magic. I mean, it is magic.
It is, but it's still also, have to do it. You are the magic.
Yes.
These are the tools to accentuate your magic. So you have to do your part. Yeah.
So that was a really big learning experience for me, and how I started shifting my approach to crystal grids was that one. Cause it was like, okay, this really works, but also I have to pay attention, and I have to be open to what the universe is going to bring me. And it may be different. Like, I want abundance to come in, and it may not be winning the lottery. Maybe it's bringing a grant. Yeah. You know, like, we don't always know what is in our highest alignment, but the universe does. 100%. And the crystals do.
It's that hopeful optimism that the universe will bring us what is actually meant and best for us, which a lot of times is different than we thought.
Yes, exactly.
But it always works out for the best. So yay, this was a fun one.
I know.
I enjoyed myself.
I will say the only other thing to mention when you're crystal gridding is when your crystal grid is either when your manifestation or your intention is accomplished, or when you feel like the crystal grid is no longer relevant and you're starting to deconstruct your crystal grid. Before you do that, the last thing, and we talked about it a little bit before, is really expressing your gratitude for the stone's support, and for the earth's support, and for the universe's support. Crystals are beings, and they like to be useful, but they also, like us, like, they want to be appreciated. Like, you like to know, like, we read the little reviews in the beginning, right? Like, we like to know when we're appreciated and that we're making a difference. And the crystals do too, right? They're not just something to be used. So really being clear about your intention. One of the things I've started doing recently is when I know a crystal grid is complete is I'll still leave it up for a few days and I will give an offering to it. And I will I think my last one was like a piece of a chocolate bar that I was really enjoying. It doesn't have to be anything like big, but it's just like showing like, thank you. And I'm so grateful for your support in making these shifts and changes in my life. So I definitely recommend doing that. And then of course, making sure to clear. I'm not as into clearing crystals as I think other people are, because I think crystals are pretty stable. But when you've used them for a crystal grid, that was a big intention that you put in there. And if you want to use the crystals for something else,
give them a little energetic bath.
Give them a little energetic bath, whether that's with water or smoke or sound. Sound waves are my favorite friend because they're just simple and easy to do. But sound waves, light waves, just make sure that whatever you do, it's appropriate for the right stone, right? Some stones don't do well with water. Some stones don't do well with sunlight. So just do your research for which crystals that you're clearing. But just make sure that you do, and then give them a little rest. They need to nap a little bit before
a little time
before jumping into something else.
Well, we didn't have a guest today, and we normally ask our guests what crystals they are currently working with themselves personally.
Oh.
So I am curious, Jillian, do you have a crystal you're working with? Even just today or yesterday?
I have a couple. One of them is unicorn stone. I actually have I've got two hearts with me. I've got like this giant one and I have a little one, but I can see like how different they look.
Yeah.
But unicorn stone, it's a combination of lepidolite, smoky quartz, pink tourmaline, sometimes blue tourmaline if you get really lucky, and clevelandite. And all together, this like very lovely synergistic combination creates a stone that is supportive through times of challenge and potentially immense trial. It helps. First of all, it's like soothing and supportive and safety, helps us feel safer. But it also helps us move through these time periods with grace, as opposed to, I guess not as opposed to, but it helps us move through it with grace so that we are able to see how we are expanding, and we are able to expand and grow and potentially heal through the challenging, potentially traumatic or difficult circumstances.
I've
got a lot going on right now, guys. There's a lot going on in the background in my life. There's a lot of upheaval, so...
We are completely in tune again because I couldn't remember my third crystal. So I typically end up choosing 3 crystals when I work with them. And last night I chose 3 and I found the 2. I had put them away already. I'm like, okay, I found my 2. What was the third one? It was a unicorn stone. It was a unicorn stone freeform.
Oh my gosh.
That I set along with my 2 lepidolites. How funny was that? So for me, it was a unicorn stone. Mm-hmm. And then I'm obsessed with lepidolite, anti-stress, anti-anxiety. But I have my gem lepidolite Scully Babe.
Oh,
isn't
so
that rad?
Beautiful.
And then this is actually a euphorolite. That was, I think it was a gift from Gary, but little DT. So I had this, and the freeform unicorn stone by my bed because I've been having a really hard time sleeping because my mind is going a lot. And so that was
that's where I have my giant heart is next to my bed.
How funny.
I have it on my nightstand.
Always in tune without even realizing.
I know.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, you guys. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure and rate us with a little 5 stars or even leave a review. We love reading them. We appreciate so much hearing your feedback. Gives us motivation to continue on. So,
and if you have any questions or if there's if there's topics that you would like us to explore, especially if it deals with with crystals specifically, let us know. Comment on our Instagram, because we're, coming up with our topics for the rest of this year. And then in our bonus episodes, we're going to be doing a Q&A, like answering some of your questions that you all might have. So please let us know if there's things that burning crystal questions that you have that we can potentially answer.
We would love to dive in.
Or if there's topics that you're interested in, especially, not necessarily crystals, but anything, right? We've got a year's worth of topics to plan. So what do you want to hear us talk about for an hour? Exactly.
And then don't forget, if you haven't yet, subscribe to us on YouTube, because you can watch this like a show if you'd like, as well as make sure and hit the subscribe button so that you're getting notified.
You can see the crystals as we show them, and all of my wild gesticulations when I'm explaining things. That's how I roll.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you.
Yes. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time.
Have a beautiful day.